Hi there. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and call everybody out on it. What I see out in the crowd is smartphones, and a few laptops. And the people who don't have the laptops, probably they're worried about their batteries being dead. So if you think about it, that's actually pretty normal. I'm not going to say that you're being rude. You're just trying to be productive with your time. One of the things that we've adapted to is this, the fact that we now have more computing power in our pockets than we had as an actual main desktop 5 years ago. We can basically do anything off of our phones. This is what we like to think. But most of the time, it really comes down to you're trying to stay connected. You've got that SMS, you've got email, you've got text messaging available. You feel like you have that pulse on your IT infrastructure. So if an alert goes off in System Center Operations Manager, you get pinged with those emails. You know about it. You can respond to it and start putting out fires. Well, can you? Because one of the things that immediately happens is, yes, you get the email, but to actually respond to that, how do you actually solve that? Well, okay, I'll take a break. I'll fire up the VPN, I'll turn on my laptop, and I'll remote in, and then maybe I'll restart a SQL service, something like that. Well, why would you have to fire up your VPN to be able to do something like that? What if you could just reach out on your phone, under the table, trying to covertly put out a fire in the middle of a presentation? Well, no one else has to even be aware of it. So that's kind of part of the answering of the call of mobility, being productive on any device, anywhere. So it doesn't matter that it's a Windows Phone, iOS, Android, tablet, Air, MacBook. We see everything out in the crowd. So how do we go about that? As far as enabling mobility, there are more options than we've ever had before. So of course, there's a native app for everything. So if I want to be able to do things like manage my Office 365 tenant, there is an Office 365 administration app to be able to manage my tenant. And it's a native for Android, it's native for iOS, and that works. And we can push that out through Intune. That's old tech. That's existed for years and years and years. Maybe it's not necessarily utilized, but it's existed. That's not new. Where we're actually looking at is things like, well, I have this web app, or maybe I have a really secure environment where we have Link or we have OWA, but to even get to it, you have a VPN. That's pretty hard to use, but you can use it. Well, how do you make that usable on an iPad? Most people are not going to turn on a company VPN and configure those certificates and VPN profiles, turn on the VPN and then access OWA. That's just not practical for the typical user. It's too advanced and it's too cumbersome. So instead we can do things through Intune now, like deploying a per app VPN configuration. So you still use the OWA app, and it triggers a VPN in the background that you've pushed out as a corporate entity. You say, this is what I need to be able to push to service this application. But then we also have the other pieces that Brad Anderson talked about in our keynote, things like the cloud-based applications, the software as a service. Microsoft is a completely different company. Plays well with others is the underlying goal of enterprise mobility, because you have to. They don't own the entire mobility ecosphere. Instead, they're having to learn how to play well with all of these other platforms and start synchronizing and saying, you know what, maybe it's okay if a company has Salesforce. If they do have Salesforce, I want them to be able to use any device, and we have the management layer to provide that hybrid identity piece where it's still an Active Directory account here on-prem, but as I add those users to a security group, it creates that account in Salesforce and provisions it, licenses it, deals with the purchasing, and whenever I remove them, it removes it off that other side. So you no longer have to deal with, okay, well, the users have this other account that they log into, and they talk directly to Dropbox or Box.net or Salesforce. And out of that, they have to worry about password resets, but they call you. Well, I can't do anything about that. I'm not on the help desk for them. I can relay your request, maybe. But this brings that control back to the corporation. It also allows you to secure provisioning. We have some new pieces like Azure Application Proxy. So, configuring VPNs on mobile, painful. Generally, most people don't do it. They know that they could, but no one bothers. So one of the things that Microsoft has done with the Azure AD Premium piece is that there is now an Azure application proxy. Through a little bit of networking magic, they have a little app with outbound 443 port access to your Azure tenant. It's not to IaaS, it's not a persistent VPN in a traditional sense. But now I have a user who got a brand new iPhone, and they fire up the company portal, and then I can push an application to them that's just a shortcut, and it goes to our intranet SharePoint server, or it goes to our intranet OWA, or it goes to any other services I can provide via a URL path through that type of piece. That's really powerful, and no one else is doing that. Then we have the additional pieces like Azure Remote App, which Brad talked about earlier, which is let's stream the individual application to a user, whether that is a non-persistent VDI user on a Windows workstation or an iPad user who just needs to be able to run a full version of Photoshop or Wireshark or PowerShell. You can actually say, I want SQL Management Studio, and I want to be able to run it on my iPad and be able to control just that app, and then throw it away. Nothing saved. There was no application there. It's not even app-v'd. There's no container there. It's just streaming it from the cloud. And the user has very little to do aside from log in with their Active Directory account. And then we also have that, let's take it to the whole other piece where we enable the full desktop experience on any device. And then lastly, we have work folders, which I think are a little underutilized now, being able to synchronize your work anywhere. But I think you're going to see a lot of cool features in Windows 10 around this particular piece. So in the interest of doing a live demo, because I'm not a big fan of slide decks, I am going to enroll my user. So let me go ahead, fire up my iPad, and get this talking. All right. So let me fire up Air Server. Make sure it's running. And it's always the tragedy with live demos is whether or not it works. So here I'm able to stream wirelessly from my iPad. And for the user experience, you just tell them go to the App Store. Go to the Microsoft company portal. They click download. It's going to download that particular application. Now, here I'm logging in as Johnny. He is a web social media consultant. He's not actually part of the company. He's not part of their normal AD. So some companies have this partition effect where they don't want consultants coming in internal to their AD. So instead, I've made him an Azure user only, so he's only joined there. But he's like a typical user. He wants everything that he needs to do his job, and he wants to be able to use things like really bad passwords. So here I'm going to log in. I get a branded experience, but I'm going to log in with his really lousy password. And okay, well maybe I allow that type of a password to happen. Let me go ahead and log in on my mobile device, and it's triggering a multi-factor authentication request. So let me go ahead and flip over to Air Server. And of course, it's going to be noisy. All right. So apparently there's a sync issue between Air Server. Essentially, I got a request. I could have had a PIN pop up, but instead I just got a prompt that says verify this connection. So I could have had it call me. I could have had it send me a text message, just like your banks do. When you have the 6-digit PIN, you throw it into your password and you're good. I kind of like the Microsoft app because there it just pops up and says accept, deny, report fraud. So I just hit accept. So Johnny logs in. It's currently going to start doing this whole trust thing, and this is going to vary by device. On an iPad, there's a lot of prompts. So I'm going to say I'm going to install the profile. I put in my PIN, and this is going to start generating a key exchange. Basically, it starts hashing out a PKI type of trust between this device and my tenant. So the reason why I wanted to kick this off early, and we'll jump back to this in just a minute because I do have a couple more slides to touch on, is if you're familiar with Configuration Manager, how long does it take for you to provision a new client and to not just say that the device is enrolled, not just to push a piece of software, but also do baseline compliance rules, do policy, kick off encryption. So I'm going to let this set for a few minutes. It takes about 2 minutes on my average trial. All right. And of course, thank you, Anil. It's got a pretty noisy thing since it's popping up from my Twitter account right now. Okay, so when we're talking EMS, I want to show a few things about how this fits together because I get these questions all the time. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. It's not comprehensive. It's just kind of the highlights. Enterprise Mobility Suite includes Intune, Azure AD Premium, and Azure RMS. So out of that, Intune, you guys are probably already familiar with. It's not new to System Center Universe. That's where your policies, your software updates, like Windows updates, and including automatic deployment rules, endpoint protection. It does much more, but those are the highlights. Azure AD Premium, if I actually listed all the features, it's going to be a gigantic list because it has so many disconnected little features that are incredibly valuable. Things like multi-factor authentication for both cloud-based as well as on-premises applications. So I can take your existing SharePoint servers today and force multi-factor authentication to be able to log into not just the whole site, I can even say just the CEO's sites I can protect with that additional layer of authentication to make sure, hey, this is security. This is the engineering department's plan for a power plant. I want to lock it down. That's something that we can do. It also starts including things like the Forefront Identity Manager licenses, soon to be MIM. So you have that user that you can then synchronize to Lotus Notes or Domino and things like that. All of these, basically anything that's a database-driven system through LDAP or any, gosh, the list with FIM is way outside of my purview. But I'll just basically say it includes those users for that on-premises synchronization of applications as well. It's very, very powerful. But this whole password and group self-service, there is no need for IT to deal with a ticket because a user wants to subscribe to a distribution list. There's no need for IT to have to deal with a ticket to be able to say, hey, Bob in accounting bought a new iPhone 6. We need to do something about this. That's not important. That's not part of what your core functionality should be. We're providing the capabilities for the users to manage their own devices and not have to have IT manage the devices. We manage the corporate data. We provide the protection for the identity, protection for the applications, protection for the devices, and for the actual data level. So we can protect it on the file level as well. Again, that kind of ties into Brad's keynote. So lastly, we've got the Azure RMS. That's all about protecting your individual data. That is that defaulting to protecting your data. And it does tie into file classification infrastructure servers if you have that on a file server. It does tie into your Exchange, and it does tie into SharePoint. So you can use those same templates that you're managing and synchronize them across so your data is protected under a standardized rule set regardless of environment that you're putting it through. So whether you're throwing it on your intranet or emailing it out to a federated partner, it's carrying over that type of protection. All right, and then these last two pieces I'm not going to spend much time on. Azure Remote App, application streaming from essentially a VDI. But the cool part is you don't have to scale up to a full VDI environment. You stream up to deliver an individual application. And the nice part is that scales per your needs. So you can say, hey, you know what? End of the year reports, we've got our ERP system. We want our mobile users to be able to access all of their payroll or access all of these particular applications. We ramp it up for just that time and then slam it back down. So you're not paying for this much resources year-round on-premises. Now, there is a remote app for on-premises as well. So if you have Windows Server 2012 R2, you already have it. So then you can go full desktop as a service model as well, both on-prem or off. So how do we go about empowering the users, to really make them productive, not just in communication? We already have quite a few tools to do this in the System Center stack. Intune and System Center Configuration Manager, they have the inventoried installed apps. That's a good place to start. but it doesn't actually capture most of where your data is going. So anymore, people are using Evernote, they're using Dropbox, they're using Box.net, they're leaking data through Twitter or Facebook or Google Drive. How do you know as IT how to address that? Or how do you plan for your company to develop a policy as to what do we federate, what do we trust, how do we manage that trust, and how do we block things that we don't want to happen on mobile devices? So, on average, over 80% of employees have admitted to using non-approved software as a service to do their jobs. IT is just, putting their head in the sand on this, and the app discovery tool provides a massive amount of data to be able to target, hey, these users are, they're accessing SharePoint, great. These users are using OneDrive personal, maybe not so great. And these users are posting stuff to GitHub, maybe really not great depending on what you're doing. So this gives you that capability of being able to jump in and be able to make those decisions. But once you have that data, it's time to make some decisions. So let's go ahead and say we know that a webmaster needs to have a couple media tools. He needs to have a way of publishing his code. He needs to have things like Photoshop and whatever other file transfer systems you decide you want to present. There's a native app for most everything, but for what there isn't, that's where you can start bringing in those cloud-based pieces. So once we've developed the rules of, okay, it's okay to federate with Salesforce, we're going to block Google Drive and whatever your companies are, you develop policies around that. So you can whitelist, blacklist apps. You can say, you know what, if you've rooted your device or jailbroken it, I don't trust you to have my email on it. So I'm going to pull you from being able to communicate with our Exchange server. So that is a feature today, so you can prevent data leakage. The apps to be required, available, blocked, targeted per users, and then you figure out the method of deployment. So I hit on a few different options. So you get to pick from the spectrum. Now typically the level of effort for deploying an app through Intune is a few minutes. Doing a managed version of it, a couple minutes, and that's it. Doing something like this software as a service piece, less than 5. If you're doing a lot of the more complex provisioning, yeah, you might have to plan that out over an afternoon, but it's a pretty small job. Doing the Azure Remote App piece, maybe you only have to add 10 apps, so it's essentially I take a Windows Server VM, I load those 10 apps, I do a sysprep, and I upload it to Azure. From there, it's going to ask me which applications I want to publish, and then I choose which users those apps go to, and then it's available. All right, so I'm actually going to let you guys see this in action. So Intune, if you think about it, provides that bootloader to be able to enable your users. It's your task sequence equivalent. So I can make my compliance rules here. I do my applications. It's the same thing as what you would do in Configuration Manager to be able to prepare a mobile device, and you can still manage it in Configuration Manager. So Intune and Configuration Manager do tie in. So you can say, I want to build this, I want to manage it in that single pane experience in Configuration Manager, but I still want to be able to have that cloud capability of Bob bought a new iPhone, I don't want to have to deal with it. He logs into one place and it provides the necessary resources for him to do his job, which would include things like email. Let's go ahead and automatically provision his email account so the user doesn't have to tap through the email wizard again. That might as well become a thing of the past. We can automate that. Why don't we? So let's go ahead and push VPN, certificates for link, whatever else you need. Chances are it's part of the new Intune. So it has grown up a lot since last September. It's a brand new product. If you haven't evaluated it since, do so. So then you can figure out, I've got those SaaS applications you talked about, or I want to do Azure Remote App. Well, what do I have to do to enable my users? You push out the RD client, and you push out the My Apps portal. Probably you're pushing out Office. That's it. So the My Apps portal, it has your identity management. It does allow you to share credentials. So the users don't have to know what those credentials are. So it's a single sign-on experience, but it also protects you. You have things like Facebook, Twitter accounts for corporate accounts. You don't want those users walking out with those usernames and passwords or going rogue in the event that they leave their position involuntarily. So you actually are able to encapsulate that and say, you know what? I'm going to have a security group on premises that has all of our social media team. As soon as I disable their AD account, I don't want them to be able to access any of our social media content. Great, done. So And lastly, we do have this piece of managing the third-party apps with internal AD groups. That's so powerful, being able to provision users on the fly. And of course, remote app, I'm not going to spend too much time on it because Brad talked about it as well, but it is pretty phenomenal stuff, and it's in preview now. Go test it out. That's just where I'll say sign in. If you don't even have an Azure tenant today, it doesn't matter. It's worth it just to be able to check out what a remote app can do. All right. So now that we've got that, let's go ahead and pull up. This may not be. All right. So we've got our app installation. This is a required, in my policies on the back end, I have a required rule per user. So Johnny is a member of the social media team, so he's got a cluster of applications he needs to install. And here it's going to prompt him, since he owns the device, he has to accept this. But if he declines, it's a non-compliant device, and therefore he can't get the resources he needs. He is essentially an untrusted system at that point. So he's going to hit install, and then it's going to wait a second, then it's going to pop up with another one. So this is, again, this is the My Apps portal. It's a pretty small app. And then lastly, we should have the, let's see, which one is this? All right. So here we can see now it's already loading. So I've gone from a couple minutes, and I've already provisioned a new system. So Johnny's going to have to log in on each of these apps the first time because it's the first time he's run it. And depending on your company policy, that's probably what you want to enable as well. So let's go ahead and log Johnny into the portal here. And the beautiful thing about multi-factor authentication is if I goof like that on a presentation, no one can log in, because it's not going to let you unless I prompt it off of my phone, which means that if the user does something like saves their password on a Post-it note on their desktop, then you don't have to worry about losing that set of credentials. So here I'm going to say I'm going to check for auth. It found the request. I hit verify on my phone. I didn't even have to type in anything in. So it's going to let me log in. All right, so and just for the record, I'm using a Windows device, an Android device, and an iOS up here. So plays well with others is, again, not just lip service. So here I've got my app portal. I can see that Johnny is a member of the social media team, but he's just an employee that has benefits. So he has Blue Cross Blue Shield. They use Evernote for exchanging notes. They have Google Analytics on their website. Okay, that's pretty normal. They've got the shared Google Apps, and in addition, you'll see this internal CMS, internal timesheet procedures. I'm going to go ahead and click on this, and I hope my lab is still turned on. So internal procedures, this is actually kicking off a request to Azure, and it's going to hop on a tunnel back to my home lab back in Denver, and it's going to be pretty slow because I don't have a great connection at home. But I'm inside of a website just with a couple clicks with no firewall provisioning. I haven't had to open anything up. I don't have to have inbound ports coming from this device. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and jump back to my apps, and I can pull something open like OneDrive. In OneDrive, he has a couple of accounts. So we've pushed his personal one as well as a business account that's shared. So one click, he chooses which one. I didn't have to touch anything on the login, and it provides that single sign-on experience, and boom, he's in. Same thing for Evernote, same thing for any other provider that it has that capability to tie into SAML 2.0 apps, over 2,400 of them already in the box. And then you can do your custom ones, and there's a full SDK if you're writing your own to be able to tie into this. So let's go ahead. Oh, almost forgot. One extra piece on that particular one. So in addition on his identity, we want to make sure that he updates his own profiles. We want to be able to give them the control to be able to say, you know what, I just got a new phone number or I changed my address. I don't want to have to call IT to update my Active Directory. You know how many systems out there I see in businesses that HR might own the contact information for an employee, but it's not synced to Active Directory. This provides us in a box. I see a few heads nodding. Yes. So I can say, you know what, I want to be able to click edit, I can change that, or else I can change his password on the fly. So if I wanted to change that from a really simple password, it's going to prompt me and provide this credential, and as I start typing in, it's going to give me, whether or not that's a strong password and so forth. And the experience on a mobile is a little bit different because it lags, but it's really powerful. I think it's got a lot of promise to be able to revolutionize the way that we enable our mobile users. So this last piece on this one is the RD client. And again, I'm going to get the little request to log in since he hasn't logged into this before. I'm going to add an Azure Remote app. So Johnny is kind of finicky. He wants the applications and he wants what he's used to. And some of the things he's used to are things like desktop version of Photoshop. But we don't want to license it for all of our users, or we want to deal with being able to provide it without having to install it. We don't want to have to buy the mobile edition of all these tools. We just want to provide him with a legitimate desktop version. So he's going to sign in. And so I've got a virtual machine, and this is just a typical VM. I've sysprepped it, added it into Azure, and provided that capability for it to start provisioning which applications go to him. And if I have time, I'll be able to hit that. So here I've got, boom, I'm in. I have the individual apps. It's fat finger friendly, so you don't have to be, okay, there's a start menu. I'm going to tab over with the tablet. You don't have any of those issues. If I want to pull up Notepad++, it's going to kick off a remote streaming session. It's RDP, but for partition to an individual application, so they don't get into more than they should. So really we can provide that protected experience while enabling the users with things like this. We can say that we want to be able to, on the fly, say, you know what, he also needs Paint.net, he needs PDF Creator. We can adjust that image and manage that on the back end. Nothing has to change on his tablet. We don't have to grab that iPad back from him to be able to manage and improve the capabilities. All right, so I've got a couple minutes left. I'm going to see what I can show on the back end in that abbreviated amount of time. So to be able to enable this, I'll go ahead and start off inside the Intune portal. And of course, the internet will always be slow when you're in the last few minutes on a public presentation, but that's okay. So, as we prepare this, the nice part about things like using Intune to solve these problems, one of the things that doesn't get enough hype, in my opinion, is the simple fact that I never have to upgrade this. Configuration Manager, I absolutely have to deal with making that painful decision of, okay, when do I buy? When do I bring in the new versions, and how do I do that migration? Here, I've already gotten, since I stood up this tenant, I've already had 6 major new feature upgrades. That monthly cadence has released brand new capabilities, things I couldn't have shown just a couple months ago. So within this, I've been able to configure things like saying I want to be able to put that RD client as a managed iOS app. Well, what does that mean? Managed means it's company managed. That means that the company manages just that app space and the data associated with it, so that whenever the user is no longer part of the company, or we change their roles or provisioning, we're able to retract that. So what does that look like from the user experience? So I can do a remote wipe just by tracking this down, but here I've got these 3 applications that have been pushed in addition to the company portal. If I, as a user, decide, you know what, I don't want this device being managed by my internal IT, I can go to my general settings, profile management, and I'm going to remove management. I'm going to put in my password because it's my device. I'm going to remove it. And if they're thinking they're crafty and they're still going to have access to all the applications, well, that's not exactly what they're going to get, because now you can see it's clearly removed the managed data, but it left everything else. So you can actually say, this app, I'm going to make it available regardless. These apps, I want to say, if they change positions, I want that removed from their device. So I know that I've done a lot of these webinars, so if you want to see more in depth on provisioning this, I've got a lot more details on MicrosoftMercenary.com on my blog, as well as a lot of, on YouTube, I've got a lot of recorded sessions. So if you want to see that provisioning process and a little bit more on this detail, I hope that you reach out there. By the way, go ahead and blast out some tweets, and I'll try and answer some of your questions as we go forward.